Welcome everybody to the fourth edition of the interview series hosted by UN Women Training Center's Community of Practice. My name is Kamsawa Chantarisuk or KAM, Training and Capacity Development Specialist at the UN Women Training Center. Today I'm very pleased to be joined by a wonderful friend of my brother, a comrade, Anand Pawar, who will be speaking with us today about his work on engaging men and boys through training for gender equality. Let me brief you a little bit about our COP interviews series features. It's running from June to December 2017. We would like to have conversations with different trainers and experts and practitioners to broaden our discussions and our dialogue on how training for gender equality can contribute to the work on promoting gender equality and women's rights. It's going to be last 40 minutes to 1 hour. And then if participants have questions, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand raising tab so that we have your question and we try to address them on the platform. So allow me to introduce you to our speakers and our expert today, Anand. Anand is the Executive Director of SAMYAK, a communication and resource center based in Pune in India. He has vast experience as a gender trainer, gender activist, and gender advocate in India and internationally. He has worked broadly in his own region and in other places as well globally. As an international consultant and researcher, he is involved in the conceptualizing and contextualizing of training for gender equality in different contexts that he has worked in. Anand is an active member of the South Asian Network to Address Masculinity, or known as SANAM, and is one of the International Advisory Council members of the Women's Peacemaker Program based in The Hague. So welcome, Anand. Very glad to see you and an honor. Very nice to have you. So let's start with introductory questions. So you have been working many years on promoting the roles of men and boys in promoting gender equality in India and in other parts of the world. What prompted your interest in this subject?
Yeah, it is very interesting. Yeah, to start with this question, what prompted me to get involved, get engaged with the men's training program. It certainly has a country context. Back in India in '96, it was a reproductive child health policy was adopted by the government. And as we all know, the ICPD 1994 has a mention of male involvement, and the Beijing platform in '95 also then has a male involvement in a kind of well discussed in Beijing, and then the male involvement component through developmental programs, especially in the reproductive health programs, it got introduced. Male involvement aspect of that. People really didn't know what to do with male involvement. So here in India, people thought that engaging men was not the term that time, certainly. So involving men into kitchen work possibly might promote or motivate men to get involved into women's health work was the assumption in India. And then I was responsible for a communication unit of one of the institute, which was working on health and management of health programs. So I was responsible. I was heading one of the communication centers for them, and then I really started getting into creating media to involve men into kitchen work. So our artists didn't even know how to draw, how to sketch a man holding baby or a man washing utensils. So we literally would pose, on the wash basin for the artist, and they would click us, and then they would draw so it was that primitive, if I could say. People didn't really know what to do. Towards the end of 6.5 years of my involving men into these reproductive health programs, I realized that men learn the language of equality. For instance, the final the evaluation of that project showed that it was a family survey. It was a family sample survey of or 1700 families or so, men on the gender equality scale were reporting very high, whereas the same households were reporting domestic violence. And I felt that, this mismatch of men showing gender positive attitude on the scale, but the same household women were reporting domestic violence, was something which didn't please. So as a result of that, I really quit my job and I decided to really get to the roots of that issue, because during that 6.5 years, I was going through I was going through a lot of personal transformations as a man, as a kind of activist, as I learned, but I was not very happy with the project outcomes. So I decided to work with, very consciously decided to work with feminist groups in India, and to basically share my experience and get to the roots of that. And actually, that was a kind of factor which really motivated me to continue searching, what really went wrong in that intervention. And what went wrong was the search, which really helped me continue what I do, and searching about what is happening with men. Why would they just learn the language but not transform their relationships and power relations, in different caste class contexts, etc. So it really sustained my motivation to engage with men, especially in South Asia. Yeah,
Mm. Thank you, Anand. You mentioned about engaging with feminist movements and women's rights movement in articulating the work with men and boys, so that the work is critical, and we are doing it correctly, and under the principle of do no harm, or you reinforcing gender inequality. How do you frame your work within the feminist principles?
yeah, if you see, just to also connect it with what I was saying earlier, if you see, there are these gateways to work with men. For instance, ICPD was one of the gateway to work with men. The other part in India was sexually transmitted infections and HIV/AIDS. But both the
Mm.
programs like RCH and sexuality, or not sexuality, but sexual health programs, didn't really gone far to analyze the power relations,
Mhm.
and that was the reason I decided to work with women's organization, and basically to understand how patriarchy, how work with men can be analyzed from patriarchal, anti-patriarchy or against patriarchy kind of perspective. And that actually that was what made me to involved into women's groups. And because in India long back, activist, a very senior feminist activist and well-respected activist like Kamala Basin was writing on masculinities, and many of the women's groups always express saying that we need to really work with men or engage with men, because our women with whom they were mobilizing were asking to do something with their husbands or brothers or fathers. So there is also a kind of school of thought which was coming from feminist scholarships about why to engage with men and boys, especially to see how it also privileges men, but at the same time how it basically also brings in a lot of vulnerabilities to them. Yeah. So I think my work as an individual that started with ICPD, post ICPD kind of developments, and then got into kind of reflective mode, and then started working with women's groups. It actually helped me to understand why it is important to work with feminist principles with men and boys. Because as I usually say that there are so many myths around feminism in itself. For instance, when we talk about feminism, we need to talk more about what feminism is not, rather than what feminism is, in various parts of the world, possibly. And I feel that, and as I read, as a student of feminism, as a student of masculinities, I really feel that, feminism is this overarching philosophy which talks about the world, which is not talking about just women. It is talking about the world. Feminism has something to say about sexuality, something to say about governance, something to say about development, something to say about sustainable development, something to say about environment, something to say about war, something to say about market, something to say about peace. So it is the philosophy that is to look towards the world and not just women, you know. And I really feel that it is now important to bring in all these aspects. For instance, what is it that, if at all there is a movement working with men, has to say about, say, sexuality, to about wars, about peace, about market, about governance, about development. And we need to really and I feel that, you know, we need to really engage with men on all these discussions, right? You know, it is not just about rolling chapatis or you know, cooking or taking care of children, but we need to really engage with larger issues as men. You know, for instance, you know, I would constantly keep asking this question in India. For instance, what if a very gender equal man is hating Pakistan, for instance? What if a very gender equal Indian man who is a homophobic or Islamophobic or say transphobic? That means we cannot just symbolically keep engaging with men, right? I mean, it is not just symbolic changes. You know, it's not just about men changing their behavior in domestic cause, but basically, what is it that they think about the world? You know, there could be various ideologies looking at the world and looking at the you know, communities and world. But I feel, to me, my personal politics is that, you know, I'm more I'm more convinced, rather, you know, with the principles of feminism so far, feminisms, if I could say, across the world, you know, different kind of feminisms, but
Mm.
certainly, you know, black and Dalit feminism in India.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's very good way to understand and discuss about feminism. I think, you know, it in certain contexts, to certain people, it has negative connotation. But you have pointed out so well that feminism is not about particularly group of people advocating for certain right, but it's about how we look at the social justice and how we look at the world, to advocate for the well-being for everybody of us, and including the planet, right? Not only human being. I'm particularly interested, and I think, you know, the listeners as well, in terms of, you were talking about deconstructing power relations in the classroom. How do you do that? You know, from your experience, how have you done the issue? How have you brought that issue since ICPD, the lesson learned from Beijing, from ICPD to the classroom? How do you talk to men about power relations
Yeah.
within the context of feminism? Yeah.
I think it's quite a pedagogical issue, I guess. You know, for instance, you know, there are so little spaces for men to actually reflect on the privileges part of that. You know, the privileges part of that. For instance, one of our very good friends, Dr. Abhijit Das of Center for Health
Mhm.
and Social Justice, would say that, you know, do we really want to start with men and boys from the victimhood lens or privilege lens? And I really buy his argument, saying that we need to really talk about privileges, our privileges. And those kind of spaces need to be really created, spaces which could be non-threatening training kind of situation, where men could actually start reflecting on their privileges and basically talk about their self, their personal self, you know. And I borrowed the whole philosophical proverb as personal is political to make the entire training program a kind of setting where you create environment where you convince people, saying that what is it, what personal to you, and I literally do the Carol Henish paper in my training programs, okay, on a personal is political. You know, you must be remembering doing in Laos. You know, my session was largely focusing on why personal is political, and you know, that kind of conversation is not happening with men and boys. So I feel borrowing personal is political as a political idea, as a proverb, you know, and reflecting on your personal privileges help men to basically understand all different sources of power that they must be bringing in, you know, at the table, you know, in their lives, you know. For instance, you know, in the typical Indian setting, I would engage men to reflect about their caste positions, reflect about their class positions, reflect on their region positions. For instance, a person from Delhi automatically might have kind of power of being from Delhi, you know, and a person from North India or South India possibly might not have that privilege of being a kind of North Indian men. So basically helping men to get into a kind of setting where they could analyze their personal privileges first, you know, rather
Mhm.
than talking about how patriarchy restricts them and how it creates vulnerabilities for them, and that is important. I'm not denying that part, but I feel, I really borrow what Dr. Abhijit Das would promote and advocate in saying that, we need to really talk about the privileges first and try and understand our privileges. I think that personal is political is what is missing in my workshops, in my training programs. It starts with personal is political, and understanding the phrase and understanding the importance of that phrase into the feminist movement across the world. I mean, and doing Carol Hennich's paper of 1969, and I really feel that, theorizing that way helps men to come to the table to discuss about their privileges and benefits that patriarchy is providing to them. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Anand. Indeed, I appreciated the training that you ran in Laos, in my countries, 6 or 7 years ago on this issue. I think it still resonates with me every day. You were talking about privilege, and I would like to ask you a little bit about your work with different groups of men,
Yeah.
the privilege and the power, analyzing power and analyzing privilege. SAMYAK has decided, your organization has decided to work with upper class men, which is interesting because many organizations have worked with poor men, and assuming that upper class men with education, with economic power might not need to be worked on. Um, but yeah, so patriarchy is so mixed. It works in all areas of life. So your Youth for an Equal Society, or YES program, work with young college men. How do you
Yeah.
tailor or contextualize your training initiative to this specific group? How do you bring out the intersectionality of your training, working with men from different age, from different ethnicity, level of literacy, and location?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for that interesting, very interesting question, Kham. If uh, I could elaborate a bit on why we think that it is important to work with what we label as not so easy to access men. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but prior to that, I would say that, working with men and working on issues of masculinities is completely different. I was greatly influenced with Rahul Roy's book on A Little Book on Men, that talks about sites of production of meaning, where meanings of masculinity, meanings of mardangi, meaning of manhood are created. And those sites are not embedded within the men's bodies only, because those sites where meaning of manhood is created could be media, could be food culture, could be history, could be cinemas, could be commercials, could be market, could be capital. So when we talk about working with men and on masculinities, we really mean that, it is not just about men, but it is working on masculinities, and where the meanings of, if I could borrow Cannell's work around hegemony, where the meanings of hegemonic masculinities are created across, So we need to really differentiate between working with men and working on masculinities. Having said that, when we engage with group of men and boys, that just becomes a vehicle to actually address issues around masculinities and meanings around masculinities in a given socio-cultural, political, market kind of realities. You mentioned about Youth for Equal Society. Yes, yes is the acronym of that program, which is a sporadic program with college youth. And we decided not to work with easily accessible young men. For instance, if someone knows about Indian campuses, educational graduate campuses, one would say that, the men who are part of the problem are hanging around canteens, hanging around parking lots, hanging around the college gates, and one need to really engage with them and really have dialogue with them, because there are the sites where sexual harassment is been used, performance is used, risk taking is used, and then and then basically get engaged with those kind of youth who who is not so easy to access because they have their own language. They are labeled as nuisance. They're labeled as kind of troublemakers, and they have their own realities also. Because in my reality, what I realize is that, you know, those men who are coming from urban slums, or those men who are coming from local poor neighborhoods, have their own realities, you know, have their own journey of socialization. And it is not just enough to label them as bad guys, but we need to really engage with them. And I shared this example, and a very positive example. I started working with these kind of guys, you know, because they have a very specific language, which is not very sober, which might not be very sophisticated, whatever. But you know, you need to really engage with them. And I started engaging with them through Youth for Equal Society, and the idea was involving them into organizing some kind of film festival. And we did a film festival with these men on gender masculinities and risk taking. So obviously these young men, were not at all interested getting into any kind of discussions on gender and masculinities. So they basically wanted to learn CorelDRAW as a software of design. You know, see, the compulsion was employability. Didn't know what to do with the graduation. They thought that learning CorelDRAW as a designing software possibly might increase their possibilities of employability, and they wanted to learn CorelDRAW. And there was negotiation of CorelDRAW training, and then we said that the output has to be, the result has to be a poster on risk taking, you know. So they were involved. The Youth for Equal Society group was involved into training of actually CorelDRAW, a software training. But the issue was risk taking and mardangi, masculinities. So they had to actually go through the entire cycles of training on gender and masculinities and risk taking. And believe me, they listed more than 56 such kind of risks that they take, that they perceive as risk. So it was a transformative journey together while they were learning CorelDRAW, but at the same time they were reflecting on their positions as men and the way they take risk. And finally they ended up designing wonderful poster on why men should not take risk, just to prove that they are men. So the objective was not training them into masculinities and risk taking, but it started with CorelDRAW, and it started with poster making, and then it ended up they reflecting on their ideas of manhood. And believe me, one of the guy was right-wing Hindu student unions leader in Pune, who ended up doing women's studies in Tata Institute of Social Sciences. You know, so there are potentials. Every individual has potential to transform, you know. And that was the reason we decided to work with not so easy to access men, because poor men and, you know, rural men are easily accessible. One can, I mean, you just go and start preaching them, and that's not the way. I mean, if you want to really bring them to the reflection, I guess you need to really work with also upper caste, because those are the sites where meanings are proposed. I hope I was clear. I don't know. I mean, yeah.
No, that's very interesting, and I'm glad you brought up the discussions about transformations and positive change. And I would like to add maybe I'm going to go with my last questions so that we can open the discussion up to our audience.
Yeah.
Can you tell us inspiring or good story of any transformation that you have seen or witnessed from your work, especially through training? Because again, one of the key area of our work is training, and we would like to see how training can contribute to the enhancements of gender equality and women's rights. And then we can go to the audience if there's any questions.
Yeah, you know, I would like to respond to it at two levels. Where I was a participant of training programs, and secondly, I as a facilitator, you know, and those kind of experiences. For instance, I'm greatly influenced with trainings that I attended or documented of Satish Kumar Singh, of Rahul Roy, of Sanjay Srivastav in my context, which helped me as individual to transform from a very kind of bad or goon man to a kind of reasonably better human being. So I guess the personal reflections actually helped me to become a better human being. Okay, that was part one. And part two, there are experiences where I facilitate training programs based on these experiences. There are many positive stories. There are many such positive stories. One of the positive story would be of a person called Bairam Jete, who's in Usmanabad district of the state of Maharashtra in India. The guy who really started reflecting about his relationships. And I guess that's a really interesting opening to start with men to basically start reflecting on how transformation may lead to better relationships in their personal lives. Not just as men, but just as brothers, as fathers, as sons. And I see Bairam transformed in a way. His journey is very interesting. He really started from agriculture, rural, violent man to the one who is taking care of his babies and the one who is also standing against the caste atrocities in his own village, and a champion in his social organization like Rashtra Seva Dal, where he's advocating for gender equality and why we need to really talk about humanized manhood rather than a patriarchal manhood. So these are very encouraging stories that keep me go on. While at the same time, I should tell that there was this phone call a few years back from one of the participants of the training program, and who said, Anand, what has you done to my life? Because earlier it was okay for me to have all kind of discriminatory attitudes, and I would never question myself. But now I started questioning myself, and it's quite troublesome. And that is a kind of another learning, which means that when you are talking to men and boys in kind of gender equality trainings, you actually are putting them into kind of quote unquote troubles, right? Troubles of not being compatible into their patriarchal privileges. And there are implications, there are psycho-emotional implications for men. And we need to really provide that kind of space for them. And if that space is provided to them, for them to reflect on that, to share their anxieties and fears of being a transformed man. And I guess those are very interesting stories there out. I mean, people share about their anxieties and fears of transformation, and I think our training programs need to provide that kind of space for people.
Okay, thank you. That's very inspiring, and I like that you pointed out two levels. One is to examine our own self, the whole process that we have gone through, and all of us have gone through working on this issue under the feminist principles and values, and also how you, as yourself as a trainer and facilitators, have seen people, men and boys, and even and women and girls going through this process of journey of reflecting and transforming step by step. So if I may ask Ruya to bring up some of the questions we have from the audience.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, because there are many questions I can see in the chat box. If we could start taking them.
Yes.
Great. We have our first question is from Laxman Belbasser, who asks, do you feel that we who work with men and masculinities have been able to keep up with feminist ideology and are still accountable to feminist movements and women's rights movements? Or are the people who work with this living up to these?
Please apologize. Could you please come again, because the audio was cracking.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That have people who work, he says, have we who work with, we're working with men and boys and who work with men and masculinities, have we been able to keep up and live up to feminist ideology and accountability to women's and feminist movements?
And before Anand answer, this is from Lakshman from Men Engage, I believe. Yeah.
Lakshman, thank you for that question. I mean, love you for that question. Yeah, you're right. We are the traveler of the same train, possibly. Yeah, what I feel is that over the period, yes, certainly, work with men and boys and on masculinities. is aligned with feminist scholarships and activists over the period. When I'm saying over the period, which means, you know, where we began and then where we are now is certainly a very positive scene, Lakshman. You know, we started very critically reflecting on our own associations with women's movements, with feminist scholarships, with feminist activists, and that I think, you know, we traveled a journey of a decade now. And at this moment, you know, if you ask me personally, you know, where we stand, and I think, you know, we really are standing as an ally with women's movement and with feminist movement, and, you know, not really taking over the leadership, but be an ally, you know. And yeah, I mean, I think, yes, I mean, we have been successful to reflect on our positions on that, yeah, for a decade or so now. Yeah, but it certainly was not the beginning. Now, it was not in the initial stages of work with men and boys, certainly, you know. Yeah, that's what I feel, and that's my personal opinion. Was that clear, Lakshman? I don't know. I mean, I won't be able to hear you, but Kham, Luia.
Yes, I think that was very clear. I think it's a very good answer to a very good question. And we have another very good question from Shrusti, who asks, what is your opinion of global men engage movements such as he for she, and the fact that sometimes these kinds of movements can put into practice a one-size-fit-all approach instead of being contextualized to different places?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Shrusti. Firstly, we need to really reflect on whether shall we really call ourselves as global men engage movement. I mean, movement, you know, movement, where all different ideologies and all different sects and all different thoughts and all different practices have got something common to achieve, you know. So is there something called movement? You know, that is something that's what my question is, because, you know, I come from the region where there are very strong social justice movements, you know. So my understanding of movement, being a South Asian, being in kind of a person who is involved into caste struggles and, you know, class struggles, might be different than the one who might use movement from his or her or their own context. So my question would be, actually, you know, do we really see it as a movement, you know? And if we talk about he for she, we all know, we all are aware about the whole strength of he for she, at the same time critique of he for she, as in, you know. But I seriously feel that, you know, men need to now save themselves from these terrible violent masculinities rather than saving women. You know, that's my personal political position, you know. I mean, just engage with yourself, man, you know. Just don't try to protect and save women in the world, you know. Why don't you save yourself as a man who could be you know, vulnerable to all kind of threats which are created by patriarchy and wars and God knows what kind of cultures of hatred and violence. I mean, so what I feel is that we need to really have that hashtag of he for him. You know, that's what my personal position is. He for him.
That's wonderful. I think it's a very good point, and it ties in very well with your earlier points about how we have to dwell on personal transformation through training, that it's not enough to look at how we can change other people or how we can change other things, but we have to look inside and see how we can change ourselves and the power relations in which we operate. And we have a question from, I think we have another question. Oh, Cam, for some reason, says that he's muted. But I think it's self-muting. I think you have to press the, sorry, the mute button. But I think now it should come back on. But thank you so much, Anand, for your wonderful interview and your wonderful insights into engaging men and boys in India and elsewhere. We don't have any more answers from questions from the audience, but Shrusti did say great answer. Thanks, Anand. And I think Cam's back now.
Thank you, Cam. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. Well, yeah, we don't have more questions, right, from the audience, Ruya?
I
Hello?
have,
Exactly.
hello.
We don't no more audience questions, but
I have
if you want to
I
pose
have
another
one
one,
last question for Anand then.
perfect.
Please.
So Anand, what's next for us?
Yeah. I mean, when you say us, I'm very happy that you're saying what next for us, not for me.
Well, what I say as I mean, eh, we have been working together, and I mean, us meaning in the field, for people in the field of trying to engage men and boy in these discussions. I would like to be inspired by your wisdom and visions about what's next. Where are we going next? Learning from your huge piece of experience, your life experience, your journey. So, what's next for us?
At two levels, as an agenda, I think we need to really critically address some of the world issues, you know, which are not just about gender equality, but it could be caste, class, race, war, peace, you know, nationalisms, violent nationalisms, possibly. We need to really graduate from our personal transformation to the agenda of social transformation.
Mhm.
If I mean, but while it is not, it is still important that we focus on personal transformation of men and boys towards better human beings, and saving themselves from patriarchy and a kind of violent masculinities. But at the same time, we need to really align with other social justice movements. There has to be vehicles to. It's not just when I say that Anand Pawar need to transform to a better man. I see it a very selfish tone to that. Saying that what happens with a self transformed man. I mean, what do we do with that? I mean, you need to finally contribute to the better world. I mean, a world which is based on love, world which is towards peace, world which is not afraid of talking about friendships and relationships and diversities. So philosophically, I see that that could be the next way. As a group of people, as community practitioners, community of practitioners, intellects, academicians or practitioners, what I feel is that we need to really create spaces where those who were part of this journey over more than a decade now really need to come together and reflect and see what we have actually done to the field, and also do away with all our issues. And we need to really deal with our issues and with our problems, and we need to really resolve our issues and give it a fresh start. I guess, with a very open and fresh start to the work with men and boys and on masculinities. And we need to really come together again with all the energies, with all kind of learnings over a decade now. We need to consolidate our learnings, I guess. We need to really come together.
Okay. Wonderful. It has always been an honor, Anand. Really, it has always been inspiring for me. And you know how much I admire you and your work and your organization's work. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will keep looking up at your work, and we try to find maybe other opportunities to touch base again, just to see where are you are at that time, because you have been very inspiring and your work has been very meaningful. So any last word before we end?
Thank you so much, UN Women. What I feel is that UN Women Training Center accommodating all kind of thoughts and voices across the world is really appreciated, and I'm honored to be here on this platform. I'm really happy to be part of this journey. Believe me, yeah.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Ruya and Dejan, for setting everything up and being part of this process and help facilitating the discussion.
Thank you. Bye bye. Love you all. Bye bye.
Bye bye.